Excellent. Well, good morning, Scott. Thank you for making time to chat. We are super excited to get your thoughts on a few things here. Maybe to kind of kick us off, talk a little bit about kind of your background. You're kind of listed as the godfather of marketing technology or Martech. What did you not see coming in this space when you kind of thinking about your history going back maybe say last 15 years or so?
Yeah, so I would say I've worn two hats in this industry. So one is actually as a practitioner of building Martech solutions. I built a company called Ion Interactive years ago, SaaS product to help marketers create interactive content. About 8 years ago, after I sold that company, I joined HubSpot to build their entire tech ecosystem, find all the other cool marketing technologies you could connect up to HubSpot, and actually just moved on from HubSpot here earlier this month. But sort of in parallel to that, which I would say has been my real vocation, for 17 years, I've been writing this blog, Chief Martech, of just looking at this intersection between the world of marketing and the world of software and tech that, you know, wasn't that many years ago when those things were like on just opposite ends of the career spectrum.
Right.
And they've gotten so deeply entangled. I mean, it's not just about the tech, it's about the way we change our organizations, the way the strategy of marketing works, the talents you need within the marketing department. It's been a really fascinating intersection.
And what was your background that kind of led you to this work?
So my background was as a software engineer, an entrepreneur in the software space, but I was just fascinated by the challenges that marketers had, particularly, yeah, with the whole wave of digital marketing. You had all this new possibility in front of you. What were you going to do with it?
Yeah. So coming from maybe more of a engineering background and applying some of these ideas of marketing, were you kind of an outcast with your software friends and kind of an outcast with the marketing friends?
You know, it's funny. So we hear this less today, but
Yeah.
back in the first generation, of the web and digital transformation and all that, yeah, basically engineer tech folks wanted nothing to do with marketing. There were actually like Dilbert cartoons that, yeah, marketing, that's just liquor and guessing, and vice versa. A lot of like marketers were like, wow, these tech people. Yeah, they're just really hard to work with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, it wasn't so much there was an inherent hostility between these camps, so much as they just literally did not understand each other. They were just
Right.
coming from completely different perspectives. Yet when you looked at where the world was headed, it's like, yeah, these two things are coming together one
They're
way
going to
or
collide.
another.
Yeah. And kind of building on that, when you think about today, what are you most excited? I mean, we hear about AI, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a little bit, and all the flavors of AI. But is there anything like single theme that you've been excited coming from more of a computer science background?
I think the thing that excites me is the long arc of this evolution in marketing technology. It's just been about the empowerment of what we let individuals do. I mean, this has certainly been a big wave of what we've been able to do with digital marketing for the past decade or so. Is it's just a lot easier to like get ideas out into the market and try campaigns and do this sort of test and learn strategies. But that being said, we were still pretty constrained on like, okay, to even like get an experiment out in market, how much work did that require? If we were going to do the analysis for it, did we need specialists to be able to do like the analysis for us? And you start to see like, over the years, some of these no code tools, and now with so many of these AI assistants and AI agents, you're like giving more and more power to individuals and small teams to take the ideas that are in their head and actually bring it to life. And I think that sort of ability to accelerate the amount of experimentation that we have in marketing is a huge unlock.
I agree. And I think of the interdisciplinary nature of digital marketing these days. And maybe you were really good in paid media, but you didn't quite understand SEO or vice versa. And his ability to have kind of this incredibly patient tutor that can kind of
Mhm.
sit by your side and tutor you. Or when you go to work with your colleagues, maybe in the tech world, if you don't understand what a SQL database is, or these things that now you have this ability to kind of bone up and learn instantly, which is pretty wild. I think about the old days of trying to go to YouTube or Google blog post to figure out a concept. And that's pretty amazing that we have this as a real-time tutor for sure.
Well, if you look at like the various things that the modern marketer is expected to know or expected
Yes.
to be able to execute, It's insane. I mean, marketing always had a pretty rich discipline, specialization you need to learn to understand how marketing worked. But over the past 10, 20 years, like we just keep adding more things that, yeah, marketers, you should understand, yeah, that whole search engine thing. Oh, yeah, you're going to need to be able to understand how websites work, the dynamics of mobile apps. Oh, yeah, here's the sort of, attribution models. Yeah, and like we keep adding things on top, and it's insane. I mean, no, any one individual can be a master at all of this. And for a while, the way in which we've been trying to wrestle this has been to just build more and more diverse marketing teams, that
Yeah.
include more and more different kinds of talents on the team. But that's expensive, and those talents are hard to find, And so, to your point, being able to use AI where it doesn't necessarily make any one marketer an expert in everything, but it allows them to augment, their
Yeah.
knowledge and their skill set with a lot of adjacent things that before just were much further out of reach.
I think what's interesting too is this idea of kind of generalist and specialist. So I'd love to get
Mhm.
your take about that, building on this idea of, you know a little bit about everything as a marketing leader. And you think about this kind of specialist role, do you feel AI is kind of taking that away in the sense of like you can maybe more focus more on the generalist and let the specialist start to more and more increasingly be handled by the AI or agentic?
That's a great question, and there's sort of two sides to that, because yeah, I think for a marketer to be able to do things that previously required specialists, but they can like maybe get 60, 70, 80% of the way without those specialists, is a huge unlock. So it's just sort of expanding the scope of things that as a generalist, you actually can have some control over your destiny with. That being said, I'm still in the camp that for all the incredible power of these AI engines, they're not perfectly accurate. And there's a lot of different ways in which they can, hallucinate in small and large ways. And I don't think that actually that non-determinism is like an inherently bad thing. There's actually a bunch of cases where it's pretty useful.
Hmm.
But I think there's still a role for people who are, no, I'm actually the expert in this piece of what's happening here, and I can provide a bit of a governance check, on the AI. And so you might not need that specialist all the time, but to have that ability to have like some guardrails and some governance, of these AI capabilities by people who actually know, like, all right, is this actually doing what it should be doing or not? I think there's still value to that.
Yeah. Um, you started a very famous chart years and years ago around the kind of the marketing landscape and the proliferation of all these tech tools. Maybe for folks that aren't familiar with that, explain a little bit about the genesis behind that and then how you think about kind of consolidation or expansion around these different platforms and where the specialist plays a role in that.
Sure. So yeah, I started this map in 2011 where I was just trying to persuade marketing leaders to understand how many different kinds of technology they were becoming dependent on to execute their mission. And this was again things for like your website, your CRM, your marketing automation, tools you might be using for content generation. And so I mapped these out in these different categories, and there were like 150 different companies in, like, I don't know, 30 some odd categories at the time. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like 150 different marketing technologies. Surely this will consolidate. And then, like, year over year, we just kept updating this map. And for a while, it was just exponential. Went to 300, and then 1,000, and then 2,000, and 4,000. And I mean, we've kept at it. It's, now tracked well over 15,000
Wow.
commercially
Wow.
available
Wow.
solutions in Martech as of this year. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of wild. And, I mean, there's a lot happening behind the scenes there. I would say the two things that really have had an impact in this growth is one, the barriers to creating software just keep getting lower and lower and lower. If you have an idea,
Right. Yeah.
you can build something and you can get it out there. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to build $1 billion company,
Right.
but is it
Right.
easy to get a product in market? Hell of a lot easier now than it ever was before. And I think that's sort of on the supply side. On the demand side, we've got this really just perfect storm where so many things keep changing in marketing's environment. So many of these new technologies have changed the way consumers, are looking to interact with us, how they discover us, how they find us. And there's all this competition of like, okay, well, if I figure out how to do this, to win these customers, oh, okay, it gives me a little bit of a lead for now, but then other people start to figure it out, so I have to figure out something new. It is this incredible race. And so that's perfect storm of like marketers are always feeling the need to like push the boundaries to we've got to do something different. We've got to do something new, and having a whole bunch of people who can create software to help with that relatively quickly, that's given us this insane explosion of thousands and thousands of tools.
Can I ask you a very kind of tactical question as a scenario, real quick? Given this amazing chart you've maintained and the visibility you saw at HubSpot, imagine you're a brand, maybe you're a startup and you're just getting going. If you had to kind of pick off the shelf tech you would use, is there any sort of foundational things? And also kind of thinking ahead, but maybe it's you put Google Analytics and maybe Microsoft Clarity, but like, is there kind of like a pre-built recipe to make that chocolate chip cookie, if you will, that you think a beginning entrepreneur might use?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is actually you can get started with a relatively modest set of tools. Usually we see companies pick one of the sort of marketing suites, I'll call them marketing clouds. So like HubSpot,
Yep.
has its product, Salesforce, has its marketing cloud. Zoho Dynamics. There's a few different options. And the great thing about these is, they largely give you the tools you need for like, okay, we're going to need a customer database CRM. We're going to need some sort of like marketing automation to be able to handle, like campaigns and advertising or email or, customer lifecycle marketing, things like that. We probably need a website, at least for now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, actually, if you get those foundational tools and you use them well, that's actually probably all you need for like 80% of getting things off the ground. And then a lot of these other specialist tools, you sort of bring them in when you need them. Like, hey, if I'm going to start this podcast, as part of my marketing plan, okay, I'll probably look to some sort of tool that I will use for like recording and editing and distributing those. But not everybody needs that.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time in this course and with clients in particular at Tadpole, just thinking about this idea of 80-20. What's 10 or 20% can get us 80% of the way there. And that last 20%, by the way, is pretty steep. It's nothing, it's not trivial. But I think a lot of people get a little bit overwhelmed with the tech, perhaps, and really trying to master all that without thinking of some of the basic fundamentals. Building on that, we talk a lot about moats and models and what is the moat today, and if models and these wrappers or these LLMs wrapped around something, what do you think about that in relation to kind of building your foundational tech, and then what's kind of your moat with these models on top of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a few different modes. So what your actual core product and service is, how to what degree that is or is not something that other people are easily able to create, whether it's through capital, skill set, access to market, whatever it is. I think. Boy, I lost my thought on that one.
It's a
Oh
lot to
yeah, all right.
understand.
On the
Yeah,
mode side,
yeah.
sort of the two other things that get interesting is um, the first party data, that we
Yes.
collect. Depending on the nature of your business, you might be in a position where you are collecting data from the way you engage with customers, that actually the way you're either able to leverage that data to better serve an individual customer, or possibly in aggregate, that data becomes a way of giving you an insight to the collective opportunity across customers. That,
And Scott, sorry to interrupt for one
yeah,
second. Would you mind defining maybe zero party, first party, third party? I mean, all these data there's a party around data and customer data, but maybe we'd love to hear maybe your definition of these for people that maybe aren't familiar with some of these classifications.
yeah, no, we've got a lot of parties in marketing.
Yeah, it's a big
Um,
messy party
it's
too.
a great party. Come
It's a
on in.
great party. It's just kind of messy.
Okay, so yeah, if we start with the zero party data, this is generally when a customer is explicitly telling you something about themselves. They're filling out their profile, or even using unstructured data. They're explaining in an RFP, hey, these are the things that are important to me. So they're giving you that data so you understand them. First party data is for you as the business to be able to observe the way your customers interact directly with you on properties you own. This might be purchases they're making, whether in e-commerce or in a retail store. It might be behaviors they have in your mobile app, but this starts to give you insights into, okay, the customer might not be thinking explicitly that they're giving us a bunch of this data. They probably
Right.
accept all on cookies or something like this, but it's
Yeah.
data that I am getting directly engaging with that customer. Then second party data is if you have partnerships with other companies that, hey, I have a certain first party data, a little bit of insights into a set of customers. Some of those customers are also your customers. We're not competitive. We have complementary, offerings. I'm an airline, you're a rental car service. Can we like share a certain limited amount of data to be able to help you do better business and me do better business and serve the customer better across the board? So those are very powerful. And then the third kind or fourth kind here is third party data. And this is the idea of like data that exists outside of your business, outside of even one of your direct partners. It might be engagements people are having on, Instagram or on LinkedIn. It might be visits to other websites. There's a whole ecosystem of how data of how people engage with those walled gardens or other third-party sites can be shared or purchased. Lots of constraints, a lot of quality questions on this stuff, but
Yes.
still non-trivial value to be had out there if you use it well. And so that's sort of that whole spectrum of data that you have access to.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think you think about large language models, and we have lots of data, and we can put a large language model on top of this type of data. And there's to your point, a observability or fidelity of across these different data sets, how good the data is, and if we're kind of, someone's telling us about the data with third party, not like easy to understand out of the gate. When you think about moats, though, is there certain types of data sets and types of data sets you think are really powerful for brands to be building? When you think about kind of AI and agentic and what we can turn loose if we have proprietary data on top of proprietary
Yeah.
models?
Well, again, so that first party data we were talking about, if you have a relationship with a customer and you're learning how they use your product or your service, and then based on that data, you are better personalizing the experience or like optimizing the offers and experiences you give them. That's an asset that your competitors don't have. So I think that's a great example, and you're able to feed that in, to these LLMs. Like again, LLMs tend to do really well with unstructured data. So, for instance, maybe you have a series of support calls that you've had with a customer, and you have transcripts of those calls or tickets. You understand things they were trying to do. Now as a human, you could probably spend the time and read through all that and reach some conclusions and then make a recommendation. But that's very expensive. What's pretty exciting is with these LLMs, there's a lot of cases where you're like, hey, we can feed that history, that unstructured data history into the LLM. It can sort of summarize and make recommendations of like, okay, well, based on all that, here's probably what we should be offering this customer at this point, or here's what we could describe to them as an opportunity. That's a really powerful combination.
I think it's such an exciting time, to your point around understanding customers, which was laborious. It could take a lot of time. You think about interviewing customers and trying to encode the data and pull some sort of an insight out. And now with their permission, if you can record it or either call transcripts or comments on a website or whatever, and then quickly go through these learning loops in seconds or minutes, which used to take weeks or months, I think it's pretty exciting.
I just had an example. This is in B2B, but it was a software company that, when you just do surveys and you ask people, what's your issue? What's the thing that, you find as a challenge? What are, key requirements? People don't always answer accurately in these surveys for a variety of, very reasonable reasons. But what this company did was they had all these Gong transcripts. Gong is a tool that can like record, telephone calls at the enterprise level, and so they had all these like telephone calls from all these prospects and customers, and to basically go back to that and say, okay, now let's mine this. What are the challenges that these folks have that we hear repeated? And to be able to pull that sort of insight from like people's genuine conversations and engagement, that's so powerful from a market research perspective.
I think it's amazing. And then kind of building on that, you think what Agentic can do. But there's, I think, something a precursor for this agentic world, which has so much buzz around it, but the clean, unified data. And I think oftentimes that's you mentioned data as an asset, it compounds in value. I think a lot of people maybe don't understand that. Explain a little bit when we talk about data being clean and unified before to try and reduce some of these hallucinations. From your vantage point, what are some of the challenges you've seen with companies and their data? Yeah,
Well, a lot.
that's where all my white hair comes
You
from.
know, I mean, part of it is, and let's start with structured data because that's
Right.
mostly the data that we've been using in marketing for these past couple decades. The problem is like you collect data on like an interaction with a customer, that data has a shelf life.
Yeah.
People move, people change jobs. People move from being single to being married to having kids. There's all these sort of changes that happen over time that don't automatically get reflected, in a lot of our historical, data sets. And so over time, there's this just drift, where it
Yeah.
goes out of sync. The other sort of data quality challenge we see is there's often very multiple sources by which we're getting data, on our audience, on our customers. And they aren't always perfectly aligned. The definitions of what a particular segment is, might differ. Hey, customer service treats this, defines it one way, sales
Hmm.
defines it another way, marketing defines it another, product another, and so even though when you try and bring that data together into a, 360 view of the customer, it doesn't always line up right. And so those are just challenges with like, structured data. With unstructured data, the only blessing has been up until having these LLMs, we haven't had an easy way for most companies to at scale say like, oh yeah, I want to take all those emails or ticket histories or, an RFP, and I want to distill that into some insights that will help me decide, oh, what do I take as the next step with this prospect, or, what segment should I place them into? In some ways, these LLMs are actually better at dealing with somewhat dirty data,
Right.
than the classic algorithms we had that were very fragile,
Yeah.
often, on that.
Yeah. I think the classification components and what we used to be able to do. I taught a grad course on data science, and we always remind the students 80% of this is just cleaning dirty data. 20% is applying the algorithm.
It sounds so glorious that
It
way,
does,
doesn't
right?
it?
Like, oh, we'll do all these fancy things. You're like, no, no. And we always talk about these kind of the two P's of data. It's political and it's polluted.
Hmm.
And I think that if that resonates with you, tell me about what you think about the politics of data. Because we talk about this magic world and we're going to put all these agents to work and these large language models, which all sounds just amazing. But, I feel like the tech's way ahead of what the humans can do, especially when it comes to the collaboration component of it and some of the politics.
No, yeah, well, I mean, again, technology is its own set of challenges, but it's the organizational evolution around that technology that is always 10 times harder. Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple levels to that. So one is there are legitimate interests across the business that are not perfectly aligned. Like a great example of this would be like, even just on things like data privacy and compliance and all these things. Like if you're the legal department, if you're the information security officer, there's a set of constraints that you are absolutely doing the right thing to like argue. We really have to enforce this, very strongly.
Yes.
Then, I mean, there's the other end of the spectrum, typically in marketing and sales where folks are like, hey, listen, I have a quota. I want to
Yeah.
hit this quarter and,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can kind of get this data and use it this way, and again, the wanting to find creative ways to, achieve growth, and serve the customer, that's good too, but it has to be balanced, up against like, no, the security and compliance stuff, those are, there's a lot of dangerous black swan type events,
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
exist on that, end of the spectrum. So that's one level of the politics. I think there's the other level of, again, this bringing data together from different teams across the company, a lot of power to just get a greater visibility into the customer and how the business is operating. But each one of these teams, they can get a bit protective about their data of like, hey, this is the way I think this data should be defined. You think it should be defined a different way. Here's where I think it could be used. Even if you assume everyone with the best intent I know
Right.
that's sometimes a little bit of a leap, but even if we assume
Yeah.
the absolute best intent, it's still there's just different perspectives of like, okay, who owns this data? Who should have a say over it? How should it be defined and run? Who's paying? What are the costs associated with that, and who's going to contribute to that? These are all tricky challenges when you try and get the whole enterprise connected together.
Yeah. Speak to me a little bit about if really effective leaders who've kind of managed some of these things. Is there any traits you've seen? For example, what I've noticed is those that are actually a little bit curious and playing with this stuff, getting their hands on keys, seem to be a lot more um, cognizant. I mean, obviously, don't deploy this stuff, but they're much more cognizant of where the boundaries are versus, you know, they don't understand how it works at all. But have you seen any like habits, traits, mindsets from effective leaders that kind of stitch together the data that you can then start to run the large language models and then eventually agentic?
I mean, at the highest level, it's about getting alignment on a larger mission. It's just so easy for individuals and small teams to get sort of siloed in like, okay, this is what
The
we
tribalism.
do. This is how
Yeah.
we're measured for this outcome, and you get a lot of that. The way I frame it, I guess, would be like local optimization versus global
Yeah.
optimization.
Yeah.
And I think really strong leaders, one of their characteristics is they help people come back to the global optimization,
Yes.
and really get people like aligned on that and bought in and incentivized as much as possible around that global mission. That's easier said than done. But at
Right.
the end of the day, that is what we are trying to achieve, in this more connected enterprise.
And have you found them to be more technical or better storytellers to try and achieve those missions and outcomes?
Oh, I think storytellers, those with high emotional, IQ. I mean, it's a human leadership, mission. I do think, to your point, having played a bit with these stuff hands on and feel like, all right, you have a little bit of feel, you're not just completely, you know, making things up. You're like actually able to talk with confidence, about what the opportunity is with those things. But I don't think you have to be an engineer.
Right. Yeah.
You have to be a leader.
You have to be a leader. And I think my own bias with this is you need to be somewhat conversant in some of the lingo and what is a token? What's a context? I mean, some of these things it's helpful. You don't necessarily have to be a wizard at designing things for that, but I think understanding that so you can build some bridges to the friends and technology side of the house as well.
100%.
If you think about kind of students coming out or younger people coming out, there's a lot of data showing that, there's a real hiring freeze with kind of that 0 to 5 year window of experience, at least from research from eMarketer a little bit recently. I think there's an amazing opportunity for young people or anybody to kind of rebuild their skill sets around these areas. Is there anything you've seen for mindsets and skills kind of going the other way from like the leadership side? Maybe people that are kind of coming out, maybe they're having a hard time kind of landing a job or they're worried their job's going to be kind of automated away. How do you kind of help people think about that, extending their shelf life in industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can combine that sort of just embracing the curiosity and the learning of how to use these tools with the other domain expertise that you have, the skills you have, from a leadership management perspective. I mean, the truth is, there are just actually very few people today out there who have synthesized these things well together. I mean, that's easily like the top 5%, and there's so much demand. So many businesses are trying to figure out like, okay, how do we harness this stuff? We don't even know where to begin,
Right.
And I think if you can be one of those people who can come in and like, I can show you how to begin. I think there's more opportunity there than perhaps, yeah, some of the, statistics that we're seeing where you have folks who don't have that AI savviness, that are getting caught up in the struggle for, winning these positions. Um, it's hard. On the other hand, there's also, you think about this ability for AI to increasingly provide so much power and capabilities to individuals at a really fraction of the cost for,
Right.
what you could even conceive. I think it's an absolute golden age for entrepreneurship.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like, yeah, if you can't find, the job working for the other company, like, yeah, is there some insights you have on like an opportunity here that you could maybe have an easier time building it now than at any other point in history.
I think one of the beauties of when you get older is when you see some of these waves, you kind of can grasp them a little bit better. I think I didn't quite grasp, early social or mobile or what that would mean, but I feel like this is so much bigger than all those things stacked. But then we have these paradigms of constraints we apply around, well, because of this or that. But I think when you think about the cost to build stuff and ship things, and you can vibe code something in, you know, hours, minutes, maybe it's not production ready, but you can build an MVP and go test it and things like that, which is pretty exciting. A little bit more tactical for a second. When you think about skill sets or mindsets, is there anything you're seeing from really effective younger people or people that are kind of making these career shifts? They're vibe coding stuff on the weekend or they're going to meetups. Is there anything you've seen just in your travels around industry that portrays that some of these AI native or AI native digital marketers perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's that sort of just fearlessness of experimenting with things. I mean, a week doesn't go by now that there isn't some like significantly cool new thing that had been introduced, you know. And at one point in time, we used to kind of make fun of this, in marketing and Martech of like, oh, it's like the shiny object syndrome. It's people who are always chasing the newest thing. Why don't you focus on the fundamentals more? I think, well, there's still value to the fundamentals. It's just we have to recognize we're in this inflection point where so many things are changing, that those people who I think are a little bit more predisposed to say like, okay, yeah, I'm allocating time, every week to make sure I'm staying up with this stuff and trying it. And I'm going to try some things, and when I try it, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't actually work very well, But those are also the things right now, the rate at which this stuff's improving, where you sort of have to put a, pin in that in the back of your head, and like 6 months later, let's try this again. Did I get any
Yeah.
better at that? And that's one of the things that continually seems amazing about it. So it's just people like they're just fearless about trying this stuff and trying it again and again.
I think this idea of kind of these disposable prototypes, you're going to build something and to your point, it's maybe it doesn't work. Who cares? You're just learning. How do you do it yourself? Do you block Sunday afternoons from 2 to 4? Are you that rigid, or do you just kind of follow the inspiration and mess around with it, or how do you kind of think about staying current and play with some of this stuff?
Yeah, I do not have as rigid of a schedule, but yeah, it almost always balances out to a significant portion of that, partly because even in the role I'm doing here, providing a lot of like analyst and advisory services to both brands and marketing companies, like for me, a lot of it is like I just personally need to like stay up to speed with what the frontier of what's even possible. And then I get a lot of joy out of trying to like, because the frontier is often messy and there's this sort of, chaos between what the hype is and what the reality is.
Yes.
And so I actually take great joy in trying to like distill that down into, I could probably explain this a little more simply. This part is BS. This part though is real. This part might be BS today, but boy, you play it out 6, 12, 18 months, there's going to be something really powerful there.
It's funny you mentioned 6, 12, 18 months versus 6, 12, 18 years, right? I mean, where it's fascinating that that's the time frame which we're thinking about some of this stuff.
It's
Um,
insane.
it's absolutely insane. I'd love to go a little bit deeper on agentic AI, right? We've been hearing all this buzz around this, we kind of these large language models, everything about this agentic and these ideas that we'll have these armies of agents and the modern manager will be managing agents, of these armies that are going to do things for us. Just like overview, what's your kind of, maybe for everybody that's maybe not familiar with agentic AI, what's your definition? How do you think explaining what agentic and agents are from your
Yeah,
world?
I'm chuckling because, yeah, agentic has become one of those buzzwords in the industry that you ask 10 different people, you might get 10 slightly different variations on that. I think to me, this whole idea of an agent is something that has a certain degree of autonomy, and quite frankly, might be a little bit probabilistic, in what the outcome is going to be. That's not necessarily a bad thing because, like,
Right.
again, some of this stuff of like interpreting large amounts of unstructured data, actually, it's that probabilistic interpretation that actually makes that very powerful.
I
Yeah,
think
like,
probabilistic, just to dig on that just for 1 second, I think that's something a lot of people don't fully grasp on how, this is probabilistic programming with low latency, right? I mean, which is a mouthful to say this thing's like guessing as it goes through, which is incredible what it can do, but it's not magic. And even if it's accurate 99% of the time, there's 1% of the time it will be wrong probabilistically. And if that gets propagated or passed to the next agent and the next one and the next one, then these things can kind of like do crazy things. So when you think about how do you control for some of those probabilistic, i.e., hallucinations, when you think about agentic?
Yeah. So this goes to part of that thing of like when you want to define agentic, I think sometimes we oversimplify it. We assume there's either on one end of the spectrum, like, oh, this like perfectly well structured rules based workflow. If this, then that. There's no probabilistic nature to it at all. And we've got a lot of that, like in modern marketing and operations and things like that. And then people assume like, oh, well, there's this absolute other end of the spectrum where you just turn it over to these agents and then, good luck, because to your point, it's not just probabilistic in any one agent, but, if agents are calling agents, does that propagate? Does it, expand? Um, in between those two ends of the spectrum, though, there's actually a lot of intermediary steps where we see a lot of companies today. What they're doing is they're taking those structured workflows, those
Mm.
structured automations, and they're not replacing it wholesale with agents, but rather they're like embedding sort of mini agents within them. Like, so a great example would be, again, like if I have a workflow when, let's say, I get a customer service email that comes in. I try and decide like, okay, who does that customer belong to? Where do I redirect, to someone, an agent to be a human agent to like help address that? Do I do some sort of alert? There's a set of steps that we've done. We have a lot of those sorts of fixed automations, throughout go-to-market. Well, now, what if we added in this little agent that based on, the support question that came in from that customer, we're able to sort of interpret that, take a look at all of our knowledge bases, make some recommendations, even to the own internal rep, on what possible solutions might be. That little agent thing, it's a little bit probabilistic in how it's going to be interpreting the email and how it's going to be like making decisions about what to pull out of the knowledge base. But it's almost always going to be generally good enough in the ballpark, and it becomes a way to accelerate, oh, okay, well, now by the time the, support agent is getting this stuff, they actually probably know exactly what this customer is, facing. They've got a solution, ideally ready to go for it. And then you can sort of see like, okay, well, once you do that for a while and you feel pretty comfortable with that, why do we always necessarily need the human agent then to be the one to like double check that and deliver that? Maybe over time we feel like, okay, that's reliable enough that we can actually, oh, now you get that email that comes in, we interpret it, we look up things in the knowledge base, and we turn right around and we auto-generate an email back to the customer with a little bit of a link at the bottom saying like, yeah, this is what our AI knowledge base believes is the right answer for you. If you're not satisfied or you want to speak to someone, click here. So there's still a way to get a human in the loop, but it's like you take those steps along the way that are bringing some of this AI agentic capability into the way the business operates without wholesale turning everything over to the agents and, crossing your fingers.
Yeah, yeah. Um, let's give you a scenario here and just riff on this for a second, if you don't mind. Let's say you're helping a B2B appliance parts company and they're interested in AI. They've got, ERP data, in an Oracle system or a NetSuite or something. They've got some digital marketing campaign data. Maybe they're running ads on Google, for example, and they have a CRM. Given that scenario, if you walk in, they said, Scott, we were ready to just let this agent thing, we want to really automate everything away. Where would you say they should kind of start from like a first principles perspective and kind of think about building small steps along the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things AI is good at is it's good at sort of taking out friction that was a function of I need a human to do a set of these tasks, even if the tasks themselves aren't particularly intelligent level work. It's just like, oh, no, no, we've got these workflows of how things do. And at this stage of the workflow, there's a human who intervenes and has to do this amount of work, And so I think if you look at all of the different touch points that you have with customers, whether it's like early marketing or into sales, whether it's once you have an existing customer, either the support or things around like renewals or upsells or, depending on the nature of the business, you start to like map out all of those different things and look at where is the friction, where are things that take a long time. Oh
Mm,
yeah, okay, this person wanted a to talk to a sales rep about like the new solution, we have here, and they mentioned their problems, that they're hoping this product will solve. Okay, well, in the past, what you would see a sales rep do is they'd start with some baseline generic enablement, sales enablement content. They'd go off on the web. They would try and like research, that company, understand, okay, who is that person? What's the company? Okay, let me try and like customize the deck, so that when I get on the phone with them, I can really be tailoring, the discussion to, their exact needs. Okay, well, you start to go through that stuff, and it's like, okay, we could actually have an AI agent that goes off and does the research, like, okay, understand who that person is, understand the company, what's the state, bring that back in a nice summarized report, for the sales rep. Same thing with like this deck. Okay, we've now got this sort of standardized deck, but since we've done that AI research to understand, like, oh, okay, well, this is actually the industry in, how long they've been around, what are some of the challenges? Great, let's pull that in to dynamically augment the deck with content that can be generated relevant to their particular industry. And so all these things have the property that, like, okay, if you looked the way we used to do it, is between someone wanting a call with a rep and having us actually be able to execute on that. It might have been a 2 or 3 day process where a human had to spend 5 hours prepping that.
right.
If we bring in AI to accelerate all that, okay, well, actually, we could do the call tomorrow morning. There's still a human at that point, looking at all the synthesis, make sure it's right, make sure it's tweak it. But now instead of 6 hours, maybe it's about an hour. I
Yes.
mean, that's the sort of stuff you then multiply that towards every sales conversation that a B2B organization is having. Sooner or later, and what do they say? It like starts to add up to real money.
Yeah, I think that to your point earlier, the consolidation we can do in terms of the labor costs and some of this stuff by automating some of that stuff. Speak a little bit about quantitative analysis. I think this is something that, marketers a lot of times don't like, and understandably so. Maybe some of the data, we have data spread all over the place from like how effective our campaigns work. This idea that, you can start to have agents go through and identify, wow, top of the funnel, this is performing, but how do you know it's not hallucinating? Do you allocate budget on that? What are you seeing in your world around kind of AI and agents around kind of the analytics part of marketing?
Yeah, that's again one of the ones I'm most excited about because I feel for a lot of marketers in particular, part of the lifeblood of how we are creative is we have questions. We just have a ton of questions about like, our prospect, our audience, our customers, what worked before, what didn't work, and unfortunately for the wellspring of questions that we have every day, our ability to get them answered has largely been mostly constrained. There's a relatively small set of things most marketers could self-service the answers to, for things that then they needed to turn to like a data analyst or a data scientist to go off and do. That was expensive. It was going to take time, so
Right.
we just sort of constrain those. And what we're seeing with some of these AI tools around data analytics is, again, they're not perfect replacement,
Right.
for analysts and data scientists, but now the span, the scope of things that the marketer can actually legitimately self-service, asking questions on, that's that's huge because then you combine that with the ability to use some of these other AI tools to accelerate our production of new experiments, so we're getting faster and easier at that. And then we've got a faster and easier mechanism to really like look and analyze, the outcomes and the impact, how that compared to other cohorts or other programs we were running. It just like accelerates that um, flywheel, of marketers being able to just continually develop like a deeper understanding of the audience and what works with them.
I think what's so exciting is this idea of the questions of the data. Instead of trying to click deep into Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics and try and figure out, okay, this dimension with this metric, this idea that you start to ask questions of it. Google Analytics just rolled out MCP, but maybe for people that don't know, it's a little bit of a nerdy thing, but maybe can you explain why MCP matters and this idea of kind of conversations you can start to have with data sets?
Yeah. So the short version is for that crazy Martech landscape of 15,000 different Martech tools, and then all of these different data sources, zero, first, second, third-party data. The big fly in the ointment, for the past couple decades has been there was never an integration standard. And to actually, as a business of any scale, I don't need these things off in their own little silos. I need to find ways to be able to integrate them and have them work together. That's just been very hard to do. You've had a lot of vendors who have invested a lot in trying to make it easier, but it's still every vendor kind of has their own way. They have to do the integration with the other vendors. Anyways, kind of amazing. We've gone all these years. We're never really having a standard on how things could talk to each other. Anthropic introduced MCP in the context of, hey, for those AI assistants, it would be really nice if there was just a standard in which, they could consistently ask of like, oh, a data source or a particular service I want to take an action with. And that's what that MCP, model context protocol is. It's a very simple standard for letting things connect and then start to exchange data or services. Oh my goodness, it's kind of amazing. It's taken us like decades to do this, not rocket science, but we are now finally starting to see, yeah, a standard that will let these things interact. And I do want to emphasize, just because it's a standard, that simply means like we don't have to do a lot of extra programming to say like, oh, how does this tool connect to that other tool? It still that means though that things like authentication, what are the permissions that a particular tool has access to a particular, like all that still exists. All that is still controlled and set up. This is just a way of like reducing the barrier of like getting two things to be able to even talk to each other. At least they're now all sort of able to do that in a standard exchange.
Yeah, I think of it as kind of like, the API, and there's lots of types of APIs, but what the API let us do in the way that you can build an app for Shopify and plug in and do all the stuff that's talking back and forth, and what MCP is allowing us to think about. And then to your point, the governance and the accessibility and what it can and can't touch. But I think it's such an exciting time with MCP and what you can do, and this idea of asking questions of data. But on that, I think especially in quantitative analysis, maybe you don't you run a unsupervised learning cluster block. You can drop in all the fancy keyword buzzwords and it comes back with something, but you don't know if it hallucinated or not.
Yeah, so this is why certainly developing like a certain amount of just data literacy
Yes.
and like making sure that you're always holding yourself to some common sense. Like, wait a second, if that didn't look quite right, I mean, one of the great things is for a lot of these engines, you can ask them, explain what was your rationale for that? How did
Why
you
is
do
this
that?
site
Where did you
converting at
get it?
20%?
Yeah.
I don't know why the conversion rate is 20. I don't trust 20% conversion rates out of the blue. Like that seems a little too good to
No,
be true.
exactly. And so you need a little bit of like common sense for that. And then, when we were talking at the beginning of this conversation about, I still think there's a role of, the experts, and I think particularly around like data analysis and data science, you are still going to have data analysts and data scientists, and so if you get to a place where as a marketer, you've been self-servicing a bunch of things, you've got some really interesting insights, but you actually now that I've sort of done my exploration, I've sort of honed in on the things I think are most important to make a set of decisions on. Oh, do I actually now want to open a ticket with my analyst to like, can you double check this? And yeah, I mean, that's common sense.
Common sense. Scott, last question for you. What is the one thing you think from a habit perspective marketers or aspiring marketers should be doing right now? We talk about curiosity, but is there shipping prototypes? Is there anything you've seen from like a habit or maybe even a mindset too that drives that habit?
Yeah, I think being hands-on with these tools makes a huge difference. And it's not about having to be hands-on because you personally have to be the one to implement, all of these things in your
Right.
business. It's just about actually developing the intuition of how these things work and what's possible because it's very different,
Yeah.
than anything. I mean, these things behave in ways that we are just not used to computers behaving. And again, that's not inherently a bad thing. It's just a trade-off. It's just a very different set of things it's good at, and a set of things it's less good at. And unless if you actually spend some time, playing with these things yourself, it's like hard to really have an inherent intuition on, oh, okay, this is what's possible.
Wonderful. I think a lot of encouraging people that are interested in the space is nobody really knows. We're still in such the early days. And so what an opportunity to kind of build your own personal brand and your own fluency. And you can kind of reinvent yourself with curiosity because the world's leading expert in large language models, don't they have a decade of experience applying it in marketing, right? I mean, so I think that's a really exciting time in the GPT-5 comes out in August, and here it is, end of September. So all this represents such an amazing opportunity by playing and testing and getting fluent.
I
Scott,
agree. It is a wonderful time to be in marketing.
yeah,
Exhausting, but
exhausting.
exhilarating.
Yeah, exhausting. Scott, for listeners, where can they follow along? You put out some amazing content on LinkedIn, but is there a good space for people to kind of follow up with your work?
Sure. So my blog is chiefmartech.com, but that's Chief Martech without the H at the end. Um, yeah, we're a branding choice that will haunt me forever.
Don't we all have those in our closet? Yeah. Wonderful. I would encourage anybody to check that out for sure. And thank you again for your time. Very much appreciate it. Very fun conversation.
Thanks, Jake.